Hello, and welcome to another episode of Speak, Film, and Enter, a podcast where we review and rank movies. I'm Nate.
I'm Dylan. Hello, everybody.
Today, we're reviewing a it just dropped on Hulu for free. It was, played at some festivals, was available to rent for a while. And the name of the movie we're reviewing today is On the Count of Three, which is the directorial debut for stand-up comedian Jerrod Carmichael, starring himself in the leading role, along with Christopher Abbott as a co-lead. And it's mostly just them. Dylan, do you want to tell the people what it's about?
Yeah, so On the Count of Three, Jerrod Carmichael makes his directorial debut and stars in On the Count of Three, a darkly comic feature about two best friends, Val and Kevin, on the last day of their lives. I don't know if that's a great description.
No, it's not really. So really, this is a dark comedy about two friends who make a suicide pact.
Yes.
And the movie opens with them pointing guns at each other's faces and counting to three. It cuts at two, and we kind of flash back and see how we got to this point and how they're going to spend their final day on Earth, their final day alive. Have any things they want to check off the list? Some unfinished business they need to attend to, some things they got to wrap up.
Yep.
And if you're familiar with Jerrod Carmichael's stand-up, I think this very much fits his brand of humor, which is general. Have you ever seen his stand-up before?
I feel like I have. I mean, the name sounds super familiar, but no, I'm just going to say no.
So he's got a couple, like 2 or 3 maybe, specials on HBO. I've seen 2 of them, including his one that came out earlier this year, in the spring, I want to say, or in like February or something, called Rothaniel, which is phenomenal. And he's an interesting comic in that it's very dark and brutally honest humor. And he has a very sort of methodically paced, dry delivery. And he's very, very good at kind of choosing moments to just be silent for a little longer than you'd think and just let people sit with what he said for like 5 to 15 seconds. And then like the laughs start to pick up as people think about it a little, that kind of style.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it fits very well with this movie, which is, I mean, two best friends who make a suicide pact does not sound like a comedy at all.
No, it doesn't.
This is at times a very dark comedy. How did you feel? Did you think it worked as a comedy or does it miss a little bit? Is it funny?
I think it did work as a dark comedy. I think that's the way that it should be viewed, because I definitely was laughing, but there's always like a bittersweetness to a lot of the jokes, or like you were saying, he comes from a stand-up comedy background, but he plays it for the most part like very like stoic and like he kind of indifference. And he just openly is that way. So even though he has his comedic moments, like he's not usually the one telling the joke. It's usually like something happens and then he just stays the same. Like, so it was very interesting that he comes from the stand-up comedy background, whereas Christopher Abbott, he's been around. You would recognize his face. He was in It Comes at Night and Possessor, but
he's phenomenal in Black Bear with Aubrey Plaza.
Okay, yeah.
Which I believe it's on Prime right now. I would highly recommend that movie to people if they just want to see an acting powerhouse.
Yeah, and he also starred as the title character in James White, which I did not see, but did get a lot of reviews, kind of an indie hit. But it's interesting because he is kind of the more kind of wacky one, who's kind of has a lot of energy. He's doing crazy things. He's saying crazy things. He's getting caught up in his emotions. Whereas Jerrod Carmichael's character is very much like, he's very reserved, and he's very
the straight man in this comedy.
And he's so apathetic to life. I mean, he's made a suicide pact and he wants to end his life. So everything they want to do, he's basically like, oh my God, okay, fine.
They come at it from kind of a different angle though, where like, you're right, where he comes at it as just kind of like apathy, where he's just like, I guess there's really nothing left to do, so I should just do this. Whereas his friend is like excited because his friend, without getting into too many details, has attempted this before.
Yes.
Not successfully. And his friend has a lot more energy that he brings to the table, where he's just like, okay, this is finally going to happen, which is played for comedy at times as well. And also, like, yeah, it's always at the front of your mind, like, what you're laughing at here. Because they do make jokes, and it's funny because it's brutally honest, but it's also tough because it's brutally honest.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting to see their dynamic where his friend is the one, like, he goes to his friend because he's attempted this before, and he's just like, I'm ready for this too. Let's just both get it over with.
Yep.
And his friend's like, foot on the gas, like, let's do this right now. And then as he tries to drive metaphorically or proverbially faster, Jerrod Carmichael constantly wants to maybe slow the car down just a hair because, wait, I should probably deal with this first. Or like, why do we need to go over the speed limit when we're just going to kill ourselves in like 30, like when we get there anyway? Like, we don't need to race to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you're saying. That is interesting. Yeah. They almost like slowly switch, as the movie goes on. There's a lot of like, I don't know. I feel like the kind of emotional roller coaster that they're both on, I feel like the movie did a good job of kind of capturing that, like kind of, when it's like, people do make rash decisions because they have truly reached the end of their rope. And I felt like it captured that kind of chaotic kind of energy. And like you said, like as the day goes on, they start to second guess themselves, and they start to think about like, what are the things that are really worth doing? But like, I just felt like it did a good job of capturing kind of the unpredictability and kind of like the characters are flawed. Like they're like, they have real flaws, and like they do things that like, like they shouldn't be doing. And if they talk to like a loved one, and the loved one basically like, instead of being sympathetic, basically is just like, you're acting a fool right now. Like you need to get over, like it hurts to hear it, but in a way, like, it's true because they do such a good job of like writing the characters.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch a movie where the two characters go on a journey that the audience does not want them to reach.
Yeah, that's a good point. Interesting dynamic there.
Yeah, it's different. It's kind of a destination story, the way that it's structured, but I can't recall seeing something like this where you're just constantly rooting for them to like for the situation to get derailed, or for them to get distracted by something,
or have an epiphany.
Well, right. Yeah. What you're really rooting for. But that brings us to an interesting thing as well with this movie, which is this is Carmichael's directorial debut, which we've mentioned a couple times. And it's mostly just him and Christopher Abbott. And what are their names again? I mean, Val is Jerrod Carmichael. Kevin is Christopher Abbott. And it's mostly just them. This movie's really short as well. It's like 86 minutes.
Yeah, flies by.
I was really impressed at the other actors he was able to get in this movie for most of the time, just one scene. I mean, one or two scenes. Tiffany Haddish has a scene in this movie. JB Smoove, Henry Winkler.
Yeah.
All show up in this movie. And they all play important roles, even though it's just like a scene or two. It might just be one scene for all of them. I can't.
It really basically remember. Is. It's like one like moment for each of those characters. They're on screen for like 5 to 10 minutes.
And then Lavelle Crawford is in it as well. I think he's in like maybe 2 scenes.
Yeah, he was good comic relief. I liked him showing up. And yeah, it felt like in each of their scenes, like I can see maybe why they wanted to do it, because there is a lot of like, each one of their scenes is very emotional and like starts off in one place and then ends up kind of somewhere else. Like, and so it's like a lot happens and they're very pivotal. So it's just interesting that the way that, like you said, like he got those kind of bigger name actors to come in just to like contribute that one thing to the story and then get out of the way. Especially Henry Winkler.
Right. Well, even like Tiffany Haddish too. I mean, she's like an A-list actor at this point, and she's in the movie for like 2 minutes.
Yeah. 2 minutes and a voicemail that we hear, basically.
Oh, yes. Forgot about the voicemail. But yeah, it's a fascinating movie, and one that, I mean, I would definitely say if this is a sensitive topic to you, for sure, suicide is all over this movie. It's talked about constantly. It's the entire premise of the movie. If that seems like something that you just don't want to watch, it's going to be there. It's not going to be for you. This isn't something where it's going to be kind of mentioned at the beginning and then end up in the background or anything like that. It's at the forefront of every conversation they're having throughout the entire movie. Oftentimes, like we said, to great comedic effects.
I was
like
going
when
to
they're
say,
kind of
and it's the
arguing about,
basis.
like when they're arguing about like what music you can play right before you kill yourself.
Yeah.
It's a funny conversation. But like
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned before, at the end of every joke, you kind of have this like, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
reaction to it where you remember like that they're actually still attempting to do this.
Yeah, and I think to your point, yeah, if it's just not for you, then I don't think the dark comedy will work for you. And if the dark comedy isn't working, then this movie you're not going to think it's very good, because I feel like that's like the balance that it goes for, is the dark comedy and the melodrama and like the slow kind of build to like, what's going to happen at the end. And I just think the feel and like the aesthetic of this movie was very like well done. Like it felt like it captured the themes of the movie, like this kind of small town. They don't really go into like where exactly, but just small town, a lot of driving on farm roads, pulling up
Yeah.
to like an old warehouse or an old garage, but then also mixed with, like a very realistic depiction of where Val lives, or like, there's just little things. It was very well done, like just the world that they decided to shoot this in, because I mean you could tell the story really anywhere, and I felt like the setting was perfect.
I totally agree with that. I didn't even really think about that until you brought it up, but they do a really good job of, yeah, it's a small town. It feels like a small town.
Mm-hmm.
I think they do a good job of avoiding lots of exposition.
Yeah.
They just kind of drop you into the middle of this day and you're just sort of there to figure it out. They
Mm-hmm.
don't, there's no big, like, there's no moment when one character is like, who was that again? And while the other
Yeah.
like recaps it just specifically for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Like these two
Mm-hmm.
have known each other for a long time. They know what's
So,
going on. They
and we're
don't
just going
need
to trust that you can figure it out too and
exactly,
keep up.
which is the way they talk to each other as well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the one guy, Jerrod Carmichael, shows up and he's like, "Hey, you've tried to kill yourself before. Like, I'm ready. Let's do it now." And it doesn't take him very long to agree. He doesn't need like a rewind and a recap of the last like 3 months of his friend's
Yes.
life.
Or like, remember this attempt, and I wasn't there, and now I'm here. Like, it was none of that. It was very
Yeah,
much just like here and now.
right.
Um, I thought that was well done too. And also, I just think, like we mentioned, the two main actors are on screen. It's basically just them for almost all the movie, and I felt like their on screen chemistry,
For
and
sure.
just like both of them delivered really good, solid performances. Especially, I mean, like Jerrod Carmichael in a kind of reserved way, kind of under the surface, trying to keep it all together way, and then Christopher Abbott in just like a manic depressive, like, I mean, maybe not quite, but like he's wild. Like he lets his emotions take him where
Yeah.
like where it's gonna go.
It's
And I thought he did
believable.
really well
He
too.
with where you meet him, and I don't really want to spoil that, but he plays
Hmm.
a very believable role here.
Yes.
I mean, for what they give him for his background, that sort of unhinged energy
Hmm.
comes off really well.
Yeah. And I guess the last thing I wanted to say is, I just feel like because of the subject matter, for this movie to work, it requires like a very, deft, nuanced kind of approach. And I
Yeah.
felt like the reason why it works is because it pulls off, like, it's sympathetic to its two main characters, but it also is like brutally honest about their flaws. And I just felt
Yes.
like it handled that balance well enough where it never felt like patronizing, or just, I don't know, like they were just playing into like stereotypes of like, oh, the type of person that's gonna like want to commit suicide or whatever. Like, it just treated them as like real, flawed, but still sympathetic people. And I felt like it pulled that off, which it needed to for this to work with the
Yeah,
subject
I,
matter.
I totally agree with that. That's a very good point. You want to get into the stars?
Yeah, I think we can.
All right, we'll be right back. You know what? So I'm going to go first here. And
Yeah, go for it.
we put our stars down before we do the episode because it's just way easier that way.
Yep. Oh God, I know where you're going.
What's that?
No, go, continue.
And as we've talked about this, it's really made me realize how difficult a movie like this is to pull off as well as they have. And for that reason, I am going to bump it up half a star from where I had it, which means I'm going to put it up to 4 stars out of 5. I think this is a really, really good movie. And yeah, just as we talked about it more, and I realized like how many places this could have gone wrong, and it doesn't. I just think this is really impressive, and it's short. I think a lot of people should check this movie out. But like we said, if it sounds like it might not be for you, that's totally understandable. But yeah, I think it's really, really well done. Did you just do the same thing as me?
God, Nate, it's almost like we've been friends since grade school. I honestly, I was going to say the same thing because in my mind, it was kind of between a 3.5. Like when it ended, I felt like it was a 3.5. And just because it does wrap up pretty quickly, it's a short movie. And like, there's a point near the end where you can kind of, at least I could kind of tell how it was going to end. So that I at the very end, I was like, oh, okay, maybe a tiny bit underwhelmed. But I've thought about it since I've watched it. And then talking about it with you, it's like, this really was kind of hard to pull off. And it feels very unique and like one of a kind in a lot of different ways. Like, not to mention just like the themes and all the stuff, but also like the fact that, like you mentioned, it's a journey that we don't want our main characters to achieve, which is a weird dynamic, which I feel like now thinking about it is actually more like pretty rare. So I'm going to bump it up to a 4 as well. I am going to watch it again. I think it's right in that 3.5, 4 range. And I also feel like I've been a little bit of a broken record with the reviews lately, because it's been a lot of 3.5, 4s for a while. But if you want an episode where, me and Nate disagree, there's been a few nope conversations in the last few episodes, so you can find those. And then, also like we mentioned in the podcast too, we watch movies that we think that in general that we think we're going to like, it's so I got to remind myself when I'm like, oh God, 3.5 again. It's like, well,
you're skipping all
good.
the 2s.
And yeah, like there's a lot of movies that come out. I'm sure if we reviewed every movie that came out, there'd be a lot of 2s and 1.5s and like, but I feel like this one, it had the buzz, and you saw it at the festival, right?
I honestly don't remember where I saw it, but it was back in like April.
Okay.
I think it was one of the film festivals, or maybe it was just like available to rent on Prime this whole time. Okay. And then finally free on Hulu. I can't remember where I saw this, but I saw this like 4 months ago.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, anyways, long story short, I'm also moving this up to a 4. I think it's very well done. Dark comedy, a lot of funny moments, and I have been kind of pondering it and thinking about it in the days since I saw it. So that's a 4 for me.
That's fun when just talking about it can bump the movie up for both of us.
Yeah. All right. Was there anything else?
That's it. I think you've got the quote.
I do. No man can see himself unless he borrows the eyes of a friend.